got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
Welcome back to the channel. Another DD Fantasy Rookie Mock Draft focusing on the 2025 rookie class. This is post-Senior Bowl and pre-Combine, and we hear what the comments say and what they want. They want one quarterback analysis, and we're here to do our first one quarterback 3-round mock draft. We have John Bauer at the Bauer Club, and we have Brandon Gonzalez-Cottrell, BG-C. I have to make sure I say that right. That is a tongue twister in a X handle. Brandon's joining us for the first time on this mock series. Guys, we're going to get right into it. We've already talked a lot of these players. Ray, Shane, and I did our post-Senior Bowl mock live from Mobile. Talked about where some things have changed after the Senior Bowl. But all of that is water under the bridge at this point. This is going to be one QB, so we don't have to talk probably too much about quarterbacks. And the only caveat with the scoring here is we're going to do a lineup league, start 10. So we're not talking super shallow, but not also super deep. But it's going to be a full PPR, but 2 PPR for tight ends. So adjust accordingly. We'll talk through some analysis on how to attack this format. And before we get into it, let's just start with Brandon. Brandon, welcome. And I want to talk to you real briefly on your approach when you got this format, when I sent it to you guys, what we're going to be talking about today. It's obviously one QB. It's a lineup league. But how does that tight end premium come into play after you saw what happened in Mobile and how this tight end class is shaping up?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me on. But secondly, I mean, there's a lot of good tight ends in this draft class, Scott. I think there's, with the premium, 12 teams start 10, 2 PPR. I think some of these guys are going to be some intriguing looks, especially when you start getting into, do I want to take tight end 6 or do I want to take running back 16, 17 in this draft? So I'll be excited to see kind of as we get into the later second, early third, somewhere where our decision making comes into, because that is going to play into account somewhere on how we're going to draft those 3rd round picks.
JB, you're no stranger to the 2 PPR. Given this format, how do you think the market is going to impact how you use these rookie picks? Because obviously this is a decent tight end class. There's going to be options, but as fun as it might be, there's not going to be 8 rookie tight ends that are starters / flex players, especially not right away. And everybody starts to play Dynasty now a lot more month to month, week to week, year to year. Like, you don't sit and wait for a tight end until year 4 when they could hit your flex. So how do you kind of look at this from a macro level? Like, yes, it's a good rookie class at tight end, but does that probably mean you might be able to leverage it to address other needs?
That's exactly it. I think it's going to be elevated in the back half of the second and maybe even early third, where you're going to get a lot more tight ends go. Like when you compare to last year, of course, we had Brock. And then after that, it was Ben Sinnott, Jatavion Sanders, Stover, Wiley, Theo Johnson. Like, yeah, there were some names there, but from a prospect standpoint, it is extremely elevated this year. And it goes into what you kind of mentioned. It's going to allow a lot of folks to address needs elsewhere. So with it being a 1 quarterback league, obviously we're not probably going to spend too much time there, but running back and wide receiver, if you have the darts to throw, this is going to be a very good situation and league setting standpoint that you can go address those needs. There's still a bunch of tight ends in this class I like, a lot of good profiles, but especially the running back class here, those are where my darts are going to be thrown here.
Yeah, obviously this is a 1 QB start 10. So everybody's starting a quarterback. We're going to assume just pretty stock, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, a tight end. So 3 flexes. And so tight ends can be flexes with a pretty high likelihood or a pretty high rate in this format. But you also look at it and you go, well, if I'm drafting players for flexes, which we're going to get into a point in the draft where you're just drafting flexes, whether it's a receiver, running back, or tight end, what veteran tight ends can I buy with those same picks and essentially be accomplishing the exact same thing? So I think we'll talk through the threshold of kind of where that line is and how to navigate your market. So JB will run the board for us. We will draft in linear order, guys. We heard the comments where we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. No double ups on the turns. That way there is none of this discussion of, well, I have 2 picks in a row. But reality is most people don't probably have 2 picks in a row at all of those spots. So we're going to go, as you see on the screen, Brandon, John, and Scott. So let's get to it. Brandon, 101. Ashton Jeanty's gone 101 in every draft. I assume you're going chalk here.
Yeah, I'm going to stay pretty chalk. I'm going to go with Ashton Jeanty, the 101. I don't see anything yet from the Senior Bowl information to where we're at right now that suggests that Jeanty really shouldn't be the 101. So in this format, 12 by 10, 1 quarterback, I mean, sure, if you want to get risky, maybe you take, Tyler Warren because of the format. But I think for right now, I think Ashton Jeanty really is the clear-cut 101.
JB, it's funny. We have a series coming up on Mannequin Show where we're going to talk about the values of the rookie picks on the open market. 101, what could it get you? Could it get you a Trey McBride in a league in a format like this? Or do you think even that is too much to even get with the 101? I mean, it is the 101. You can pick whoever you want. But like if I'm looking to trade the 101, given there's no super flex, like that, Bowers and McBride are the 2 players I'm going to first because it probably gives me the most points and the positional advantage that corners the market. Like, can you even get one of those guys or get in the ballpark with the 101?
My thought would be no. And I can say if I had either of those players, I would not be moving them because of the positional scarcity and the advantage that they give you. Not only are they young, especially Brock Bowers, but they're giving you just so much over replacement. And a lot of that is going to be, when we get into the draft, why I think a lot of the tight ends are going to be elevated later on, because the guys that are producing, like they're old vets. You're not getting production from these younger guys like a Dalton Kincaid or Kyle Pitts that so many people had high hopes for. So if we're talking about the 101, I don't think you're getting Brock. I don't think you're getting Trey. And if I'm forced to add to it to get to one of them, as opposed to tearing down to address the tight end position, that's the way I would go. So while I would love it, I don't think that it's going to be possible in most situations.
Well, you are up at the 102. This kind of feels like, doesn't it already feel like a spot where if you could move back a couple, you would? I mean, we've talked a lot through who's the RB2, who's the RB3, what order do I take them? But I think immediately with what you just said, it's like, you got to pick, because you would think this pick has a ton of value, but there's literally like 4 or 5 ways you could go and end up being right. So what are you doing at 102, JB?
And so twofold here. I'm going to Amari and Hampton. That has not changed for me. We've done 1 quarterback. We've done super flex. We've done 2 quarterback leagues. And I've stuck with Amari and Hampton there. I know there are question marks about the, is he going to get the early second round draft capital? I think he's still a top 50 pick. So if we're looking at it from a draft capital expectation, he's there for me. And then everything else from an analytics perspective, he's given you the 60% rush attempt market share when you look at his best year. He's durable. He's only missed 2 games in college. He's got the 3-down skill set. He's going to be fast enough. He's going to give you the speed score. 74% of his rushing yards came after contact this year. When you look at players like Quinshon Judkins, he was at like 55%. So you look at Amari and Hampton, he is a guy that is going to be able to make an impact immediately. And yes, draft landing spot's going to tell us a lot when you get to the 102, because I think some people then could go Tet, Caleb Johnson. You could go to the top tight end in this class at this point, with it being 2 PPR. But like you said, Scott, I don't know if there's a ton of difference, honestly, in this format between 102 and 107. And the way we would draft today, draft capital, landing spots, it's going to dictate a lot of movement. So while Hampton is my 102, if I could move back and pick up any type of value, I very well could still land Hampton, but then I could even get, additional assets that I could use and have at my disposal later on.
I like it. Brandon, we haven't heard from you on these mocks. Is Hampton your clear RB2? I know I've taken him every time I'm at 102. JB's taken him. He seemed like pretty consensus from the DD crowd. Are you in the same boat, or do you have a different take on the 102?
As much as I like Amari and Hampton, I'm actually going to lean more, and especially for this format, I know I'm tipping my hand here. I actually lean Travion Henderson as RB2, and I don't necessarily feel that it's a bad. I don't discredit either one of you thinking Amari and Hampton is your 102. There's some folks that out there that have Caleb Jackson as their 102. Like that's, I think from a home run hitter's perspective, Travion can take it to the house just about every single time. And I think that appeal and the fact that he's been a name that's been in the Devy circles and now has been also in the NFL Dynasty circles for about 2 or 3 years. I feel like you could make a case that Travion Henderson is easily, the RB2. I mean, Todd McShay this week in his podcast even came out and said it. So if he's saying it, that means that inside of the NFL circles, they're believing that is the case. So I don't think you're necessarily going to, I think that tier of Hampton, Henderson and Caleb, I don't think that there's really it's more of a choose. And that's why tier base is better than just straight linear rankings. So I guess depending on where you are in the situation, and it kind of also goes to what John was just talking about right now with the 102. If I can get anything to get back to the 104, I don't think John, would you feel terrible if you got Amari and Hampton for Travion Henderson in the third?
No. And the big play potential, Travion had the highest breakaway run percentage of the running backs coming out, at least the running backs of note here at almost 15%. So the big play potential is certainly there. And I think he's going to be a riser once the combine hits, if he isn't already rising.
Yeah, I think after the McShay pod, he's probably my favorite to go as the RB2 off the board in the NFL draft. If anything, just a couple voices like that will put all of these guys in the same tier to where I don't think you're going to be able to say, oh, well, one's going to get draft capital 30 picks behind the other. They're all going to go in the top 50. None may go in the top 25. So just kind of throw them all into where do they land? Who else is on their depth chart? What's the scheme? All that kind of thing. But I was with you, Brandon. I would have taken Henderson as the RB2 if we could do this now after having a couple of days to digest it. I'm going to go Tyler Warren at 103. It's not a slight on the running backs, but again, John just said he wouldn't trade Trey McBride or Brock Bowers for the 101. And I don't think Tyler Warren is as good as either one. But Tyler Warren's going to probably get draft capital equivalent to what Brock Bowers did. Fair or not. I mean, I see people saying, oh, the Jets can't pass on Tyler Warren now that they passed on Brock Bowers last year. It's well, that's not great logic, but he's going to go in the top 15. He's going to be the tight end one. There's probably not going to be much hell, if anything. He's a Penn State tight end, which means not only is he the tight end one off the board, but he'll be the most athletic tight end as well. And we're okay, he's a bulletproof prospect. He really isn't. But I think in this format, when John was saying, man, I wouldn't trade Trey McBride for the 101, right there, where's Tyler Warren going to debut in the dynasty ranks? Tight end 3, 4? It's very easy to say after those two, he's next up. You're not going to probably put Hawkinson above him. You're not putting an older Kittle above him. He's going to be in the top 5 the day he gets drafted. It's almost like the Marvin Harrison version of tight end. He just goes into the top 3, even if he hasn't played yet. So I think that's an obvious pick here, and kick it back to Brandon now for the 104. And maybe he tipped his hand, right?
Yeah, I did tip my hand, but I will be taking Travion Henderson at the 104 here. Again, he's my RB2 as of right now. He's being, again, I gave kind of the rationale behind it. I just feel like in a PPR format, I'm probably going to lean Henderson over Jackson. If it was more of a PPC format, I probably would lean Caleb Jackson over Travion Henderson just because of the format, right? The format kind of dictates a little bit of where I'm thinking the scoring could come from. So, give me Henderson.
JB 105. What do you see when people usually are in these spots? We can say, oh yeah, trade back 2 spots and just get a third. No one does that though, right?
Nope.
No one really would let you move up 2 spots for that. And I rarely see people go, oh, I traded back 2 spots, only got a third, oh man, you didn't get enough. Trade Calc says you should get at least a second. And it's like, how often do those deals actually get done? Because it's easy to say, do it, because we're assuming there's no better offers, but the deal probably looks a little bit different. What do you think? You think that's kind of a little, people don't make it if that's all they're getting, and then they end up just picking, and they should just take the free value if you're really drafting based off tiers?
That's exactly it. You're going to see a lot of situations where the buy and sell prices don't exactly line up. And maybe it's, I wouldn't move back for a third, I'd move back for a second. But a lot of folks are going to be looking at this, like Brandon mentioned, like you mentioned, Scott, from a tier-based ranking. And if I have 3 or 4 guys valued very, very closely together, what reason do I have to add a third? And that's what we're talking about, a third. Now, why would I add a second? And that's what somebody's going to be looking for. So I think unless a move is made in advance, or we get to the end of a tier and somebody sees that and they're like, okay, well, I have a tier break here. This is where I'm willing to add a little bit more value to move up. If we don't see that, I think we're going to get a lot of drafts that are just going to be, hey, pick 102 is on the block. Well, an hour later, they make the pick. Pick 103 is on the block. An hour later, they make the pick. And I think we're going to see that. And we typically see that from, year over year, where a lot of folks, they kind of fall in love with a player. Hey, I can get so-and-so at 103. And if they're still there, I don't feel the need to move up to 102 or 101. And I think we're going to see that in this class a lot, especially because the value is really driven by the running back position. And we know how volatile that can be.
How comfortable are you doing that right now? Because I think once everybody kind of agrees on the tiers, it's too late. Mm-hmm. But if you made this deal today, like if you traded the 102 for the 105 in a second, 104 in a second, I think that probably gets accepted today. But you're at the risk of missing the tier by 1 pick and then it being double the cost to get back in, and you don't want to pay that. So, I mean, like, these process deals sound great until everybody agrees on the tiers, and then nobody wants to trade into the last spot of the tier unless it is, I'm charging you a premium to get into that last running back, which is probably this spot right here. But if you would have traded 102 for 105 in a second, you're still getting what? You going Caleb Johnson at 105?
Yeah, that's where I'm going. So if it was Amari and Hampton for Caleb Johnson in a third, like when it's all said and done, I would probably, I would be happy with that. But like you said, if you either have to make the move now or it's not going to be made, or if you do make it and then Henderson goes out and just destroys the combine, which a lot of folks, that is the expectation. And then it's like, okay, now he's the consensus 102 for, across the board. And now that price is even higher because there is that growing buzz and you miss out on the value at that point in time. So it's a lot of should I, shouldn't I? And you have to take that calculated risk one way or another. So it is, you got to take a stand.
Yeah, there's definitely a risk reward because we've seen years where we have certain players slotted into certain slots, and then, one of those guys goes to a place where they already have an RB1, and you're like, I still like Travion Henderson, but I don't really love him if he gets drafted to this spot. You know what I mean? And you're like, okay, now I can't put him in the top 4 now. He's still probably in the first round, but I'm not putting him in that second tier. So kind of got to have some conviction if you want to pick up some extra value, and it works both ways. You can pay a little extra to trade up right now if you really think you know how the deals are going to get nailed, and you can get the value now. 106, I think it's pretty easy. It's Tet McMillan. I'm not even sure he's the wide receiver 1. I've heard a lot more discourse on him since we've started prospect season. He's by default the 101 receiver-wise, but I think the only thing that he really has going for him right now is the prospect of he's going to get the best draft capital. Everyone just assumes he's a top 10 pick. And what if he's not? What if there's a couple other receivers that are obviously like Luther Burden and probably both Travis Hunter and Emeka Egbuka? They're all different receivers than Tet McMillan. But how do we know that a team doesn't value one of those guys, maybe not higher than him, but as a better fit? And so the draft capital isn't just wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4. and it could be mixed around depending on who has what pick. So I just think he's the best receiver right now. But if you told me he's not the wide receiver one, even come pre-NFL draft, it wouldn't shock me. So 106, but numerous people, including you guys, have said he's not your wide receiver one. And so it feels like more of a value play here. On 106 would definitely be a pick I'd be looking. If I'm looking at receiver, there's a lot of options I could probably move. A lot of guys that I think people would go, ooh, I would take Tet McMillan over that guy. Well, I might be willing to make the deal. So, Brandon, you're up at 107. What you doing?
I'm actually going to the other. I'm going to wide receiver 1B, and that's Luther Burden. I think at the end of the day, he's probably going to get top 20 draft capital. And I think for a lot of people, that's going to be important. And I think that's part of the reason, too, Scott, to your why do people take Tet McMillan at 106 is because he's been mocked to just about the New Orleans Saints just about every time, or Las Vegas Raiders. So he's been inside of the top 10. And there's a lot of statistical data that talks about when you get to the top 10, what kind of wide receiver you can be or what kind of outcome wide receiver you can be. And I feel like with Luther Burden he's pretty firm in the top 20. I don't think he's going to slide past Denver. Right. I think whether he goes to Denver, whether he goes to Indy, whether he goes to some team in that later teens, even if he slips a little bit, he's still a first round wide receiver. And at the end of the day, that's going to matter. It's going to matter because it gets him opportunity. It's going to matter because he's going to have multiple opportunities. And I think for drafters who are in this spot, sure, they're probably going to try to get out of this. Like, where would you guys, what current wide receiver would you try to move if you didn't want to get a Luther Burden? What tier of wide receiver fantasy wise would we be trying to get at? Like, can 107, is that like beyond JSN, John?
Is there a reflection in my glasses right now? Because I have my tiers up and I'm staring at JSN and T Higgins, like that wide receiver 14 to 17 range. Like that, right? That's spot on for me.
So without even like looking completely, and if you want all of John's rankings, go to ddfantasyfootball.com and make sure that you sign up, and all of his rankings are there for everybody. But for me, top 20 draft capital, multiple opportunities. I feel very comfortable if I have to make this pick. This is the guy that I would want to be investing in at 107.
So JB, just strategy wise, if you have one of these picks, we've all been in the spot where, let's say you have one of these picks right now. You're holding the 106 through 110 in your league. Mm-hmm. I think there's going to be 3 or 4 receivers that go in that range in a lot of these drafts, right? Probably the top 4 receivers. Maybe McMillan will go a little bit higher, but if your goal is with that pick to get a receiver, it feels like that is a move that is better made now. Even if you take a little bit of a quote unquote loss on the trade, like you go a little lower than what KTC says, because my experience, if I was on the clock at the 106 and beyond in a real league and everyone knows I'm looking receiver, what are they looking at on the board? Receiver. So it's very easy for someone to go, well, I'm just going to take Rashee Rice over Tet McMillan, so I'm not making that trade. Now, if Caleb Johnson's on the board and they want a running back, then the trade feels like it has a better chance of getting done. But when you've just left the picks for all the receiver tiers, then it feels like trading for a veteran receiver that is good. We're not talking like chopped liver. We're talking JSN, Garrett Wilson, Drake, like proven receivers. It feels like the comparison for the tradee is very easy, right? Like, I'm not taking Luther Burden over JSN. Why would I ever make that trade? I need a tax because one is proven and one isn't. So that feels like if your goal is to get a receiver, be sending those deals now, even if you have to add a third, even if you have to add a late second. Like, if that's your goal, don't wait till you're on the clock, because then the comparison becomes very easy for the other team trading with you.
Yeah, unless there's something cross-positionally that's going to get done. You see it all the time, in super flex leagues where, hey, I need a quarterback. The pick that's going to be made is a quarterback. Why would I trade a quarterback for that pick when I need a quarterback? Like, there's a lot of like catch-22s going on. So I completely agree. Unless it's something that's going to be cross-positional, there's very little opportunity and wiggle room there to move within a tier whenever that pick is actually on the clock and you see, hey, it's a wide receiver. What are we going to do there?
Pick on the clock. You were up, my friend.
Oh, I do want to make a comment on Tet McMillan, and this is going to be very quick. I know, we're going through these drafts, and it's based on the fact that we're looking at draft capital and landing spots and trying to make an educated guess. So at this point in time, like I've seen the comments. We talk about reading the comments and seeing the comments. Tet McMillan, he's going to get the draft capital. If anybody were to say, hey, especially with roster construction, obviously that's unknown right now. We're just going through a mock. But if you're set at running back and you're like, hey, I have the 102 and wide receivers my position, like I would not, this goes back to having that 102 to 107 kind of in the same tier. I wouldn't knock anybody for going Tet McMillan. So I think that's obviously a very nice value at 106, but it's just all kind of clumped together. So just a quick comment I wanted to make there. At 108, I am going to go with who I think is a very undervalued tight end, and it's because he's just completely overshadowed by the raw numbers that Tyler Warren has given. But for me, it's going to be Colston Loveland. You look at the market share numbers, like he put up almost a 50% college dominator there in Michigan. The big thing that worries me, and I want to say big, but there were only 10 targets that were defined as contested for him in 2024, only a 20% contested catch rate. I don't have to tell the listeners that's not great. So again, small sample size, but one thing to keep an eye on. But in 2 PPR, the same discussion that was made for Tyler Warren, when you're looking at these veterans, Colston Loveland, I think, especially with the expected draft capital, he's going to slide in there maybe with, in between like a Hawk, Kittle, and then like I'm taking him over Kincaid, who still is going as tight end 6 right now. So anyway, Colston Loveland, 108 in this start, 1 quarterback, but 2 PPR for tight ends. That's where I'm going.
Yeah, I saw Brandon's reaction. That would have been my pick as well. And it's just simply, he's going to be a first-round tight end. He's going to be a tight end that has a profile all around that people are going to like. Now, they don't like the raw numbers to what you said, but there's going to be some analytical folks that are still in on Colston Loveland. Like, he's going to check all the boxes. And I think at this point, if you've ever been in a league like this, if you have late first, they don't hold a lot of weight. They're more of just a mechanism to get a better flavor, into your diet. So if you have one of these picks, like truly, if you're talking about shooting for upside in this format, it's him over a receiver. It's him over the RB5. Like, you have to really be right on those players. Whereas he just has to be good. You know what I mean? Like, even if he's just solid, you have not just the asset, but you have the potential of being a flex-worthy player right away, which is probably the similar bet you're going to get with some of the other players. So you definitely sniped me. I'm going to take a similar approach. I haven't done this yet.
One quick comment, Scott. Sorry to interrupt, but like, you say he just has to be okay. Like Jatavion Sanders, his value went up from last year. Yes, he wasn't going at 108 even in this format, but like you hit the nail on the head. Like, you just have to put together a decent rookie season, and then even less so if a lot of the production comes in the back half, because that's what people remember. And I think Loveland's going to give us that.
Yeah, and speaking of 109, like, I'm truly going to embrace this. One thing that I heard down in Mobile very consistently was kind of piggybacking on the Tet McMillan talk, that if we're going to be true to the bet that we're going to make, Tet McMillan will not be the first wide receiver off the board. It'll be Travis Hunter, who was the majority of people's best receiver in the class. It's Travis Hunter. Now, does that mean he's going to play receiver, get as many snaps? That's the one question. But if right now you just told me, give me the receiver that has the most upside, arguably the best production and the highest draft capital, and the only question is, does he play receiver? I think this is where you go, okay, he has the potential to be like a Justin Jefferson. Doesn't mean he's going to be, but I'm willing to push this pick here over a couple other receivers that I just don't think offer the home run ability that he will. So I'm going to go Travis Hunter. I think I've taken him or taken other receivers over him every time, but I'm going to I'm going to divert a little bit here in this one QB format, because if I'm right, then, oh well, I'm going to take Hunter over everybody else. So, Brandon, you're up. We'll speed through the second and third round just to get some more picks on the table. But 110, you're up. What you doing? I know you got sniped on Loveman. What are you thinking?
This is kind of the point, I think, in a draft, especially in a 12 by 10, where you get from guys that are going to make true instant impact, right, in a lineup league, to where you start to think, okay, these are good flex guys in lineup. Like, I'm comfortable starting this guy in a flex spot, right? I'm not going to start these guys definitively week in, week out. Like, the guys that are already listed 1 through 9, if they hit, you're going to probably be starting them in your running back, your wide receiver, your tight end over just about anything. Right now, we're getting into the guys where it's like, okay, these are flex guys, and I'm hoping that I can get them into one of those. If I'm on a rebuilder, I hope I can get these guys into my starting wide receiver spot. And so with this pick, I'm going with a guy that is starting to get mocked into the first round. And I don't want to say he's necessarily out of sight, out of mind, but I'm taking Emeka Egbuka here at 110. He's getting mocked right now. I just saw in Pro Football 7-round mock that he's at the 29th position to the Washington Commanders. Could you imagine the ADV that comes with Egbuka being the second wide receiver with Jada Daniels, who we all expect to get more opportunity? Like, I'm just thinking he's going to be a late first rounder, which means he's going to be on a playoff team, which means he's going to get, opportunity. And it goes back to the whole Luther Burden thing. First round pick, first round opportunity, multiple opportunities. So that's where I'm at. Emeka Egbuka, 110.
Yeah, you nailed it. A lot of playoff teams are going to be picking in the range. I definitely think he goes in the first round. Probably could go as high as top 20, top 18, but good team most likely. And he's an Ohio State receiver. That adds some ADV, whether you like it or not. There's going to be other receivers that have produced ahead of him that he played with that it's going to help his ADV. So Emeka Egbuka, JB, 111. What are you doing?
I've taken this dude in every one of our mock drafts, and it's not going to be any different here. Out of Ole Miss, Trey Harris, big play machine. Not the top end speed that a lot of people were looking for, but against man, he was absolutely explosive. And we dove in the numbers on previous episodes, but he's given you also a 62% contested catch rate. There's no 50-50 ball with Trey Harris. So give me Trey Harris, just like Brandon mentioned with Emeka Egbuka landing on a playoff team. You're at 111, presumably your own pick. You were a finalist in your league last year, adding another weapon in Trey Harris.
Good pick. I'm kind of surprised. I'll get Quinshon Judkins at the 112. Funny, in a super flex we did the other night, I think Shane took him at the 106 and then immediately regretted it. But isn't it funny when we just change the format a little bit, and even when we make it one QB that Judkins goes at the 112 versus the 106, 7, 8 that we've seen him go in super flex draft. So it's kind of interesting that if there's not a signal better, that there's a very ambiguous range between that 106 to 112, 201, 202, even in a single QB. This pick illustrates it right there. So we're done with the first round. We'll go rapid fire on these, trying to get as many players on the board as possible. Brandon, it's back to you to start the second.
All right, I'm going to finally I'm going to stop the QB slide here. I'm going to take Cam Ward at 201. I think the rushing upside that he does possess, even though it's not necessarily his game, the reality is he's probably going to be a top 3 pick. So whether he goes to Tennessee, Cleveland, and or my New York Giants, he's going to be on the field pretty quickly. And yes, I know that it's a 1 QB format, but I feel like this is kind of where I feel like he's going to slot in. The QB1 is going to slot in at some point. And so give me Cam. I feel like, yeah, he's ranked right now, I think, an underdog at like QB 23. I suspect that can rise a little bit with whether he goes to Tennessee, again, think of it this way. If he goes to Tennessee with Calvin Ridley, or he goes to Cleveland with Jerry Jeudy, or he goes to New York, he slips all the way to 3 with Malik Neighbors, what people will do.
I'm curious, JB, Brandon, for you as well. Like, a lot of times in 1 QB, and you're drafting for the team that was the worst roster, probably. Does a QB help that kind of roster? Because it feels like QB values in 1 QB are all over the place. If the team at 109 has terrible QBs, they could have taken Cam Ward. I could also see where nobody in the league feels bad about their QBs, and then they just let Cam Ward fall to the third. So it's like, I don't even think there's a right answer as to like, what is he worth? It's really, you got to look at your league, figure out who the hell could take a quarterback. And if somebody already has two and they still want to just take Cam Ward for the quote unquote value, then what can you do? But it kind of feels like if you have a quarterback need, I'd rather do something different than use the 201, given some of the players on the board. But I can't argue with the fact that if you were just sitting in this spot and needed a QB, sure, I'll take him because I do think he has the safest plus higher upside or highest upside in the class if you're drafting right here. So JB 202, what are you doing?
Just on the quarterbacks, I think there's going to be such a wide range in one quarterback leagues. You might have a league where they go, like you said, Scott, if there's a need at 108, then there's other leagues that quarterback one might not go till the back end of the second. So I think there's going to be a very wide range. So that's an interesting dynamic. For me, I'm going to lean into the format here. We talk about production. We talk about raw numbers. I'm going to go Harold Fannin out of Bowling Green. A little bit smaller, but we've seen some of the tight ends, that were quote unquote a little bit smaller. Sam Laporta, obviously one of the guys there recently. Do I think he goes in the first, him being Harold Fannin? No, but I do think we could see late second round draft capital. And based on his production, I know it was at Bowling Green. I know it was in the MAC. He's a super young prospect, but he has just put together an extremely incredible, especially 2024 season. So give me Harold Fannin.
Yeah, I can't argue. I mean, I think it's more of a niche bet than with Loveland or Warren, but the same thing applies with why you take Loveland at 108 is basically, if you're right, the upside is immense in this format relative to what else you could get. I'm going to go Ollie Gordon at 203. I think he's clearly separated himself from this huge group of running backs, not just for what he did at the Senior Bowl, but like Ray said, he's just different. He adds something, not just a name, but he adds some historical production, some historical hype to go along with the fact that he's just a bigger specimen than all the other running backs, and people will like that. So there's some ADV attached to this pick. He's probably not going any higher than the early third round. So like he's a day 2 running back. He's not going to threaten Henderson or Johnson or Hampton for draft capital. But I think he's just, if you're taking a running back, there's a lot more that goes into this versus like the 6 or 7 other ones that I'd put in the same tier. Brandon, you're up, 204.
I'm going to take Cam Scatterbo, Arizona State running back. Again, leaning into the format. We're in the format, right? It's PPR, right? So there's a handful of guys that you probably could consider in this range. I'm not going to tip my hand anymore. But there's a handful of guys that you could consider in this range. And when we're looking at PPR start 10, again, Scatterbo has the ability he was showing at Arizona State his ability to catch the football. Now, you say what you want about his breakaway speed, all that other stuff, but the simple fact is he can catch the football out of the backfield. And I think that's going to be valuable at the NFL level and getting him on the field. So let me go with Cam Scatterbo, Arizona State.
JB, what's your read on the sentiment or the ADV on Cam Scatterbo now compared to 3 weeks ago when we did our first mock, where it was like, oh my gosh, this guy's just going to rise and not be stopped? You think it's lessened? Do you think it'll pick back up? What do you think?
I certainly think it's lessened just because we haven't heard his name over the last few weeks. From we have the Senior Bowl. We had these other players that were producing, and you mentioned Ollie Gordon. You mentioned some of the other guys there. You look at the quarterback position, Jackson Dart, but like the running back position, it ties back to what you mentioned to kick off the show, and it's so true. Dynasty fantasy football, it is no longer a long-term game for many people. It's a weekly game. It's a monthly game, and that is spot on. So the fact that we all have the attention span of a rock, and myself included in that at times, the fact that Cam Scatterbo has not been talked about over the last 2 hours in the media, that's going to be reflected in the overall sentiment. So yeah, I completely agree. On one of our mocks that was taking place, it was pretty much during the college football playoffs. I mentioned Cam Scatterby was like the flavor of the week. Well, that week is over and he's no longer the flavor, but I still like the profile, even though it might take him a while to run that 40. We'll see. I know that was a conversation we had. I was like, oh, you could do like a 4.55. And you were like, he's not doing a 4.55. So let's get a 4.62. I could do that. But I like Cam there. The receiving upside, like it's there. There's no doubt about that.
If he comes in and he's 215 plus and he can somehow manage like a 4.6 flat, I think people will be like, that's fine for what he is. Like they don't expect him to be the most athletic running back. It's just, I'm a little worried. Does he come in and he's not as big as you think and he's way slower than you think. And you're like, well, he's a good receiver, but there's, we'll see. I'm very interested to see if the ADV builds back up on him. 205, what are you doing here?
I'm going to stick with the running backs. I'm going to go Devin Neal out of Kansas. He doesn't necessarily give you the receiving work and volume that some of these other running backs have given you, but over the last 3 seasons, he's like checked off 25 receptions each year. He gives you enough in the reception market share perspective. Over 2.8 rush yards per team rush attempt. He's going to be fast enough, and I think he's going to land possibly at the end of day 2, maybe early day 3, and that's going to be good enough for me at this point in time, at this point in the draft. So give me Devin Neal. He's a running back I have my eye on, and I think there's a lot of intriguing landing spots for him based on where he could go in the draft.
Yeah, getting him at RB8 here is pretty good compared to where he was going before. I mean, listen, he was not bigger than Ollie Gordon. He was not better than Brashard Smith. He didn't do anything clearly way better than all of the running backs there at the Senior Bowl, but I stood next to almost every running back. He was one of the few where I was like, all right, yeah, this dude's legitimately bigger than me. A lot of the others, I'm like, no. So he does check that box. I do think he's going to be probably a 3rd or 4th round pick, so no questions there. So, if he's your RB 6, 7, 8, he's taking the next one off the board. I'm going to go Matthew Golden. I think that's probably the consensus favorite to be the wide receiver 4 off the board. He's probably right there with Igbuka in terms of fighting for that. Maybe hedge our bets. I don't know what the over-under on first-round receivers is, but I'd say it's like 3.5, and him and Igbuka are the ones that are probably fighting for those late-round slots. I didn't have him here earlier, but there's enough people that have talked about, he didn't need to be at the Senior Bowl. He's clearly better than the guys that were at the Senior Bowl. He's clearly just as good, or believes he's just as good as Trey Harris and the other guys that are in that same range. So too much steam for him to say that I don't put him here, even if I'm like, you know what, I need to probably see more. That this is where he's probably going to go. Getting a first-round receiver here, can't go wrong with it. Brandon, back to you. 207.
That was the pick I was going to take. So it's all good. But I'm going to now lean into the format because I haven't done it yet. And I'm going to go tight end. I'm going to go to a guy that last week I think earned himself a little bit of money. I'm going to go with Elijah Arroyo, tight end out of Miami. I think for his size and what he did at the Senior Bowl, he's going to have some ADV. I think he's going to test well at the combine. I've seen some reports that he's a top 50 pick, which if we see that to happen, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that's just the February hype. We haven't seen enough. But even if he's a late day 2, early day 3 pick, or late round 2, early round 3 pick, I think many people are going to be all the way in on Arroyo at this point at the 207. I mean, Scott, 207, what tight end could you even conceivably trade for at this point in this format?
We could rip through a bunch of names and I'll let JB make his pick here. Like, I think it's probably one of those things where nobody knows what the board's going to look like. And so again, if you look at this pick and go, whoa, I really want a tight end. I currently have this tight end. A lot of people are going to go, well, I really wouldn't rather have a rookie Elijah Arroyo over the guy I'm trading you. But if they really wanted Devin Neal or Matthew Golden, then they're like, oh yeah, I'll give you my tight end instead of that. So you have to be cross positional, but he really impressed. He looked the part. And that's sometimes all you need in this format. So I'll just leave it at that. JB 208, what are you doing?
And this is a topic for a completely different show because it would be a long discussion, but I'm a very numbers oriented guy. I know there's steam around Matthew Golden and Elijah Arroyo, but I struggle with those two specifically. And interestingly enough, they went back to back. But again, like you mentioned, Matthew Golden, he's probably going to go at the back end of the first round. Elijah Arroyo, a lot of hype in the end of the second round in the NFL draft. But like, where was the production? And I struggle with that. So again, that's a completely another show that we could dive into. Certainly don't have time today.
Well,
but
think of it this way: like we had Ricky Pearsall last year, we had Xavier Legette last year. Like I think if you're taking guys like this, it's simply you can look at players like that and say that's kind of how it would feel. You know what I mean? But what you do with the pick from there, I think, is really what matters. I have no conviction on Matthew Golden, but if you tell me he's threatening to go in the first round, I'll worry about it later. So to your point, I'm with you. I totally agree with you on both of those guys. We weren't even drafting those guys 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. So,
but again, if the NFL tells us, look at these guys, you got to pay attention. So I completely get that. Another guy that I think I've taken in every mock, still not exactly sure how old he is. I can't find his birthday, but Alec Iamaner out of Stanford, early declare, minimal yak, but that's going to happen when you're a deep threat guy, over 14 yards for his average depth of target, higher contested target rate, still just under 50% contested catch rate. You know, he works a lot outside, but he's another guy. I mentioned it with Trey Harris. He's a big play receiver, and he suffered from, poor quarterback play at Stanford this year. So for me, I'll go Alec Iamaner here in the 208.
I'll move this along for everything Brandon said. I will go Mason Taylor at 209. Same logic applies. Had a very good Senior Bowl. It's probably going to be a top 75 pick. I don't know if he's going to be tight end 3, 4, 5, 6. But I think taking a shot on a guy like that does have pedigree. He did go to LSU. I mean, I can't get past the one thing that kind of points me towards him over some of the others is you look at his production as a true freshman with Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Keyshawn Butte. He held his own against those guys. And that's pretty rare. So even though he didn't really get much better and he kind of faded, I do remember Mason Taylor after his freshman year was like the Devy tight end 1 besides Brock Bowers. Like people were going, this is going to be the next dude. His dad played in the NFL, and then he really didn't get better. So maybe there's some ceiling concerns, but hard to not take him at 209. Brandon, 210. And then we'll do a rapid fire third round just to get some more players that maybe we haven't talked about a bunch on the board.
Yeah, I'm going to take DJ Giddens, running back, Kansas State.
Okay.
Again, playing to the format, there's still a lot of running backs here that I'm looking at a list and I'm like, man, I really want that guy. Man, I really want that guy. But I feel like DJ Giddens is definitely proven enough. Kansas State, he's got good size, around 6'1", 6 foot, 220. Like I think he's going to test well. He's got hands, PPR format. Yeah, I'll take Giddens there. I'll take the shot at 210.
Yeah, JB, he's fallen the last couple mocks because, he didn't go to the Senior Bowl. So clearly all these guys that were there are better than him, but yet, we use the same logic for guys that didn't go and go, oh, well, they were too good for the Senior. Like Iamaner, he was too good for the Senior Bowl, but Cam Scatterboo and DJ Giddens, nah, man, they ducked. They didn't want to be there. So what are you doing at 211?
This is one could just absolutely be a wasted pick, but from an analytics perspective, I like Tootin out of Virginia Tech, and I'm firing at 211.
Me too, bro. Me too.
I think he's gonna go. He's gonna go day 3. Like I don't think there's any way he goes end of the third round. But transferred from North Carolina A&T, made an immediate impact in year 1 for Virginia Tech. He's fast. 10% receiving college dominator. And he's super elusive. 0.34 missed tackles forced per attempt. That's high. So give me 2 in here at 211, and we'll see how things go over the next, just under 3 months.
Yeah, very impressive. He was the fastest running back at the Senior Bowl. Definitely one of those where when I stood next to him, couldn't have told you he was in the NFL if you would have seen him out there. You're just like, okay, yeah, he's clearly bigger than me, muscle wise, but like, he right there, but
just under 5'9".
Impressive. I'm going to go with another Senior Bowl running back. I would take him over Tootin, but we're right in that range where you're getting your guy. We'll go Brashard Smith. I think, like Ray said all last week, like he has something that a lot of these other running backs here, maybe they're capable of, but they don't have. He's a converted receiver. He is smaller, but, we've seen 3 or 4 running backs that were sub 200 pounds be in the top 15, top 20 in terms of overall touches. So not saying even that's his ceiling, but at the 212, like there's probably a world where, he could be, and I know they don't have this type of archetype of running back much anymore, but like you look at him and you go, he just needs to kind of fall backwards into a little more opportunity than you thought, and he's going to have a reason that gets him on the field right away. So Brashard Smith, 212. All right, guys, third round. We've had, I think, some interesting picks, some new players that have jumped into the second round based on our post-Senior Bowl takes. But we each get 4 picks here in the third round. We'll start with Brandon. Rapid fire, like probably 30 seconds on each pick. What are you doing?
301. I'm going RJ Harvey. Good size. Probably gonna test okay, but yeah, RJ Harvey here. I'm gonna start taking shots. PPR. I'm gonna just keep taking shots. UCF guy.
Good stuff. JB, these picks, like, are you more apt to save these picks for the season or take a few profiles that you like? I know you're in a lot of leagues. I'm in a lot of leagues. We tend to treat these picks like, if I really like a guy, I'm going to get 30% of this player. And if I'm right, then I have that excess that I can trade from in my portfolio. What's your just general strategy on these late picks? And let's start ripping them.
Yeah. Like you said, probably be a little bit more overweight. But again, like there's just so many things that could change between now and when the actual rookie drafts happen, obviously. But I'm going to go with Tiny Tez. I'm going to go Tez Johnson here at the 302. I mean, there's a lot of things to like about his profile. Sure, the size, not the best, but very strong after the catch, 7 yards after the catch per reception here in 2024. Plays a little bit close to the line of scrimmage, minimal ADOT, but 2.5% contested target rate. The dude gets open. He's going to be fast enough, certainly, and then primarily out of the slot, which I'm okay because, again, he's doing a lot after the reception. So give me Tez Johnson, and I think he's going to get good enough draft capital to make you feel good taking him in the third round.
Brandon, real quick, with the ADV part of this, I'm looking at the end of our board. I think all 3 of us should have taken Tez Johnson over Giddens, Tootin, and Brashard Smith. Just based on.
Yep.
Do you see a world where any of those 3 running backs, you're immediately going, everybody has to have them by the start of the season? Whereas Tez Johnson, I'm like, dude, people may be chasing after him after the first training camp highlight just because of what we've seen. I don't know. I think it's a mistake. We should have all taken him over those dart throw running backs we win at 210 through 212.
I mean, I think Tez is probably easily at that 210 spot where I take DJ Giddens if this is best ball as opposed to lineup. I think also plays it. Like, I think that plays into the format, right? Because with best ball, I only really need him to be Calvin Austin. I just need him to find a 40-yard touchdown pass. That's all I need. And he hits my lineup. Whereas with lineup, do I really want to jam that Tez Johnson in, week out? Probably not as much.
Yep. All right. I know
when I have a chance to take a 5th or 6th round running back over a potential day 2 receiver, you just have to, right?
Well, I think to Brandon's point, like if you're actually using these guys for your lineup, it's very pragmatic to hit the running backs, right? Like you're either going to play them or you're not.
I did the same. I did the same.
But if you're looking at an asset, which I think generally that's how three of us play a little bit more, like I can see the world where I'm like, oh, well, no one will give me a second for this pick. But if I take Tez Johnson, I can get 2 seconds by, the first month of the season if he has a role. If not, to your point, Brandon, if he doesn't have a role and he does become year one Calvin Austin, he's a roster clogger. You can't trade him. You have to throw him into a deal because he's not startable, whereas any of those running backs could be startable pretty much any week they get opportunity. 303, this is tough for me because there's a bunch of guys I would like to take. I'm just going to hit another running back. I got to interview him. One of the better interviews at the Senior Bowl. I'll go Damian Martinez at the 303. I think he's right in the mix with the last 4 running backs that have gone. They could all be interchangeable. I think he'll get mid-day 3 draft capital. I hope that's more mid-round 4 instead of early round 6. But I think he mixes right in. It's really pick your poison. So, Brandon, 304, what you doing?
Going Woody Marks, USC. I think he's going to have that. It's in that same category, right? We're hoping for like late round 3, early round 4. Got the size, got the speed, got the production. 2 schools, one an SEC school and at USC. Yeah, I'll take Woody Marks there. Take the shot.
Yep, a lot of running backs going to get ripped. JB, 305.
Oh boy. So I'm all tiered together here with these guys. Give me, I'm going to go Dylan Sampson. I took him a little bit earlier in a previous mock, but again, we're firing through these running backs right here. I do have a few names that I like probably with my next 2 picks, but I'll take Dylan Sampson here. Another fastback, doesn't give you the best receiving profile, but he gives you enough right there. 2.8 yards per team rush attempt. Again, good enough. So we'll see if what he was able to do at Tennessee. And I know it's a very, specific style they play, and is what he was able to do. Is he going to be able to translate here at the next level? Maybe not, but again, middle of 3rd, I'm willing to pay that price to find out.
Yeah. I mean, my next pick is I'm looking my own board. I probably would have taken this player over Damian Martinez, but I just had him on my list and I haven't moved him up to where I should. So I'm going to go Trevor Etienne at 306. I'm looking for angles. And I think I took him in the previous mock I did with Ray and Shane, and we talked about this exact angle of his brother plays in the NFL. He played at 2 Power 5 schools. Everybody knows him. He was very impressive last week. I came into the week thinking, okay, he's just another one of these RBs, right? He's no better than the bottom 2 or 3. But he was one of the top 3 or 4 running backs there. Like everything that Devin Neal did, Trevor Etienne did. And I think there's an extra angle, maybe some extra juice with him there at 306. So we got 2 picks each. Brandon at 307. Are you going to continue this running back run?
No, actually, I'm going to stop the running back run. I'm going to go tight end. I'm going to go Arondé Gatson.
I thought he was going to be there for me at 311. Oh my
Get our first snipe. Let's go.
There we go. Now, I'm surprised he fell this far. If I remember correctly, the previous mock that Shane, Scott, and Ray did, Gatson was already well gone by this point. So, in a 2 PPR format, it was between him and probably another tight end that I'm sure John probably has on his list. So I was like, well, let me go. I think Gatson, though, he has that profile. He's got the frame that, he's being comped to a Darren Waller. I'm hoping it's the Vegas Darren Waller and not the New York Giants Darren Waller. So, but I could see him being a guy that if he gets on the field and gets production, people are going to be in on him because of his size.
JB, we got a reaction from you there. Talk about it.
Former wide receiver, fast, especially for a tight end, 4.5 is speed, just under 30% college dominator. Can we get him in there for Mike Gesicki over there in Cincy, Scott? I think that could be kind of sexy.
It could, yeah. I mean, maybe a little bit of a different conversation on, the type of tight end he is. I think I have similar concerns to some of the other tight ends that have come in terms of converted receivers. Like, do they get on the field right away? Like that's a big thing. Like Ray always says, you have to be on the field for you to be basically a dynasty asset that people covet. Period. Like you can say, oh, I think he'll grow into his body and he'll be ready to go in 2027. But I'm not waiting 2 years. So I need something that I can sell somebody on right away. That's my one concern with him. But we've seen a lot of guys like this that eventually they are better than some of the guys that maybe get drafted higher that don't have as high of a ceiling. So I can't argue the pick. What are you going to do since you got sniped on Gatson? 308.
308. Should we make this a 4-round mock? Should we? No.
Another day.
Not yet.
Another day. Yes.
All right. Let's go. I'm going to go Jalen Royals. Over 3.1 yards per team pass attempt. Really good after the catch, almost 8 yards after the catch per reception. And plays a little bit further down the field. I mentioned like a Tez Johnson where he's playing super close to the line of scrimmage at 5 yards, average up the target. We're almost at 9.5. 16% contested target rate, 53% contested catch rate. He's going to have a nice 40 time. Doesn't operate really out of the slot, 22%, so primarily outside. But like the numbers are there coming from Utah State. Again, how is that going to translate? But at this point in the draft, it's a player I wanted to take, so I'm taking Jalen Royals.
Can't argue with it. I think there's you got to sell yourself on any of the receivers going forward. 309. There's a bunch of running backs I would still be willing to draft. I think you could take Manungai. I think you could take Donovan Edwards, LaQuint Allen, Jaden Blue. There's a lot of running backs. I'm going to pass on taking any running backs because I think at this point, all of them are just RBs on a 53. You hope they go to a good spot, but they're not going to really probably have any role. You're not going to be able to tell their immediate role when they get drafted, I don't think. So I think it's between receivers and tight ends. There's 2 tight ends I'd be willing to take here. I think if I had to pick between them, I can sell myself on Luke Lachey. There hasn't been a lot of hype for him, but he's an Iowa tight end. He's probably going to go day 2, maybe early day 3, but it's going to be better draft capital than the running backs, and he's an Iowa tight end. Like I can probably say if he looks anything, I can probably sell people on that he's an Iowa tight end. So I think that's a slam dunk wild card pick that might have a potential to earn some profit later on. Brandon, last pick, 310.
I'm going Gunnar Helm, tight end, Texas.
Okay.
I think he was another one that didn't go down to the Senior Bowl. So, out of sight, out of mind, but he had a really good year with Quinn Ewers. And I could see a scenario again in the format where he becomes valuable. So give me Gunnar Helm.
And let me just say,
JB too.
Well, I was going to say like the sentiment on Gunnar Helm in Mobile was not good. But he also had just played 2 weeks before. So you could sell me that there's a legitimate reason he didn't play, even though there were players that had played more recently than him that were there. But he seemed like he got punished for not being there, and like 4 tight ends leaped him, even though he was probably a top 4 or 5 tight end coming into the week, and it feels like he just falls by default. So I don't hate the value for the same reasons I took Luke Lachey. JB, your last selection. What are you doing?
I'm gonna buy into the hype, and obviously it was a great story at the Senior Bowl for him. But I'm gonna go with Jack Besh. And
hey,
you
talk about it, man. Talk about ADV. Talk about it.
It's another weird one for me. Like we mentioned Matthew Golden, we mentioned Elijah Arroyo. Like Jack Besh, like analytically, his numbers aren't fantastic, but you already have big names saying this is this year's Puka. And that is going to carry weight whether we like it or not. So for me, at the 311, Jack Besh, if he were to creep into like 3rd round draft capital, I think there's a chance that you talk about sentiment, it's going to be there for Jack Besh. And I just think a lot of people are going to be cheering for him.
Hey, Everything I said about Mason Taylor's college production goes for Jack Besh. He was on the same LSU team. So, like, he held his own. He held his own. So I love that pick. Honestly, Brandon, I think that's the best pick of the third round if you're just talking about today. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, JB, but he's the next Puka. He's the Puka of the class. And I mean, whether he is or not, the fact that that's already being peddled probably brings a lot more value than these 3 of these last 4 damn tight ends that we've taken. You know, like it feels like that's a smart pick. So kudos to you on that one. It's going to be a boring last pick, but I somehow got Ray to take him in the last mock, and I'm not going to let him go undrafted because, you know, Isaiah Bond probably goes in the second round, and just people have just been convinced that he sucks because he shouldn't have declared yet. There's also an argument that he wouldn't have declared if he wasn't somebody that they valued fairly highly. So it's interesting that when you like the player, people will use that argument for the player. When you don't like the player is he's an idiot. He should have never declared. He's going to be a 6th round pick. Yet their favorite guy, he must have got favorable grades from the NFL. So, you know, he's declaring early. So I think he gets drafted way higher and he's worth the risk here.
Yeah, he was a name I still had on my board.
Well, boys, 3 rounds. Anything stand out to you, Brandon, quickly? The format. Yeah, you typed in the chat. We all forgot about quarterback, but I mean, talk about that because I honestly think that there's a world where only 1 or 2 QBs go in a 3-round 1 QB mock like this, just because simply the scarcity is not there and the upside of the class doesn't exist. So talk about your final thoughts, B.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard in a 1 QB. I think it's going to be I think where it's going to be very interesting to see is who's actually the QB2. Can we make that? Can we have that quick conversation? Will it be shedeur or will it be potentially?
Who would it be
Jackson
for you?
Dart?
Right now, you have to select who would it be for you, milking in the fact that you're not getting any sort of scarcity / value. It's just who is truly the QB2 that could be a starter in this format. Who would it be for you?
It feels like maybe Jackson Dart. I know that might feel a little, weird or awkward, but I mean, Jackson Dart has rushing ability. And I think that is, he's going to probably be, he's already rising, right? He went from what felt like day 2 already instantly. He's already locked in day 1, according to Jordan Schultz. It wouldn't be surprising if by the combine and after pro day, he's locked in top 15. And all it takes is one team, right? Like, nobody had Bo Nix at this point even remotely close to the 12th pick in Denver last year. So I feel like he's the kind of guy that if you want to take a stab in your 4th round of your 1 QB draft, I might be taking a shot on Jackson Dart for the upside, right? Of the upside to go for any one of these guys that are probably in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I mean, JB, like, I hear Brandon's argument, but I'm guessing in a league like this, like Riley Leonard would be on waivers. Jalen Milroe may be on waivers. Guys like Will Levis will be on waivers. Daniel Jones is on waivers. Like, do you even want to waste even a 3rd rounder on a guy like shedeur or Jackson Dart and just hope that you might need them? Or is it like, if I ever got to that level of, especially Jackson Dart, where I'm taking a lot of risk, kind of feels like I'll just address that if I ever have that emergency situation. Otherwise, I'm just going to take shots on different positions instead of quarterback.
Maybe if the league dynamic dictated it, because again, the wide range of values in a 1 quarterback league. But if I'm just looking at my team, I probably have a quarterback, at least 1 quarterback I feel really good about. And then if I have any decent, quarterback 24 to 30 on my roster, like, is there a need to roster 3? I don't think so. So I don't know. Again, there's leagues I'm sure you're still going to see 3 or 4 quarterbacks go in the first 36 picks just because the name recognition and, I probably should be taking a quarterback, but give me the upside in some of these, a lot of these guys that we picked in this format.
Yeah, I think to close that argument, I mean, we did a 1 QB start 10, right? But we didn't specify how many roster spots. I've seen some 1 QBs where there's 35 roster spots. Well, guess what? Every team's going to roster 5 quarterbacks because there's nothing else to roster, which means the access to just going, oh, well, Daniel Jones is going to start this week. I'll come up off waivers. It then becomes you have to pry him off of somebody else's team who has him as their QB5. They're never using him, but you have to trade for him. Versus if this is 23-man rosters, I bet you the entire backup QB field is on waivers. So why would you ever draft a guy like Jalen Milroe or Riley Leonard or maybe even Jackson Dart? Because as soon as a backup QB that has any upside gets a spot start or two, you can get him for free. So I think that total roster spot number does matter a lot in terms of how I value these later QBs. If it's one that's deeper, I may want to draft a QB2 or QB3 because the cost of getting the fill-in or replacement value means I have to go through another team to do it versus just pick them up for free. So maybe that's the tiebreaker in terms of your league, how many roster spots, and whether you want to put a couple more roster spots towards a quarterback. So, guys, this was fun. First post-Senior Bowl mock draft for UJB. First one on the channel for you, Brandon. BG-C on X and the Bauer Club on X. Brandon also runs the DD Fantasy Twitter handle, so anything that usually comes out there is his doing. Thank you for doing that, Brandon. Thank you both for joining. Like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for all the support that we've got thus far. We're going to continue to knock out these mocks. Check out the Dynasty Theory shows, Destination Dynasty, content coming from Ray very soon. There's going to be some best ball content coming as well. And with that, we will sign off. Thank you, everybody. Hit us up in the comments if you want us to do different formats. Appreciate you.